Auteur theory is the theory that a filmmaker, like an artist, gives his work its own recognisable style, whether that be visual, conceptual, or otherwise. They take control of their films and use the camera like a paintbrush, and they give all of their films a recognisable style because they give their films um, common signifying features. If the director may intend to do this or might not recognise he's doing this. Auteur theory was invented by Alexander Ostrach in 1948 because he thought filmmaking should be taken more seriously than art and literature is. He looked at what Russian and German films are being made and said the filmmaker writes with his camera as a writer writes with his pen. He believed that the filmmaker was using the same amount of creativity and expression as an artist or a writer was. Cafés de Cinéma, an influential French film magazine that was founded in 1951, openly discussed how restrictive the French film industry was at the time, because at the time most films that were being made were adapted from novels, plays, or existing stories, and they had to be very true to the original story, and so that restricted the creativity and the freedom that the filmmaker could express. In cafés, they believed that the director should have more freedom to follow his own vision and make more intellectual films with more intelligent original storylines. This theory was misinterpreted by an American called Andrew Sarris. Andrew Sarris wanted more for films as well. He wanted them to be taken more seriously as well. He hated the snobbery of how books were taken more seriously than films. In literature, there was a canon, which is a group of universally accepted books that are considered classics, like Dickens would write, and he wanted the same for films. He believed that the director should always have something to say in his films. His films should move the medium of film along, the development of the medium of film along. The directors should include in-jokes that people in the industry would get, and he believed there was only one way to view a film, which was the way the director intended it. It didn't matter how the audience interpreted it. And he was inadvertently going against Café's and Ostrach's theories of auteur theory because he was making films more restrictive again if there was only one way to interpret a film. His theory, therefore, does subsequently it bears less weight with modern film academics as they have gone back to the less judgmental philosophy of what is an auteur. Today I'm talking about the film director Stanley Kubrick, who has to be the ultimate auteur, I think. He has complete control over his films and is involved in every single aspect of his films, so he can express his vision probably more than any other film director. Stanley Kubrick is an American film director who was born in 1928 and died in 1999. Over the 13 films he has left the world with, he did create some unbelievable masterpieces. He was born to a Jewish family, but he wasn't overly religious. Kubrick never really did that well academically, to the displeasure of his father, who was a doctor, but who also permitted his early interest in photography, which did draw Kubrick away from his studies. Kubrick became a freelance photographer and sold a series to Look magazine. He moved to Greenwich Village in 1948, a place that is famous for its creativity and freedom of expression, and you could definitely see an art house influence in some of his films like 2001 Space Odyssey and Clockwork Orange, where you really have to search to find out what the films are about and what the films are expressing. Kubrick was always very interested in books, which is probably the reason a lot of his films were adaptations of books. People have said that he always looked at books from the characters in books from a human point of view, and I think it definitely had an effect on his filmmaking, as the characters in his films have a lot of depth to them and definitely have more than one side to them. His father taught Kubrick how to play chess, and Kubrick developed a great love of the game. He said, "I used to play chess 12 hours a day. You sit there and look at the board, and suddenly your heart leaps. Your hand trembles to pick up a piece and move it. But what chess teaches you is that you must sit there calmly and think about whether it's really a good idea or whether there are other better ideas." Lessons he learned from chess have clearly been applied to his film production methods, as he goes into meticulous detail and often takes very long to make a film. He stores thousands of boxes of location recce's and and scripts and all sorts of things. He held the record for the longest film shoot. I think it was over 400 days. Um, he's a perfectionist, and he would take his time developing every aspect of a project. He was going to make a film on the Holocaust, and it took him longer to just do the basic research for this film than it did for Steven Spielberg to film, edit, and release Schindler's List. He is a perfectionist to the extreme, and he has rejected um, many projects even after he has seriously begun developing them. Stanley Kubrick's main signifying features in his films are his use of camera work, his use of editing, the typical themes he has in his films, um, the typical characters, character development, and character dynamic he has in his films, elaborate cinematography, such as his use of colour, amazing mise-en-scene, and his particular um, attention to detail. Um, the fact that he doesn't use recurring cast members is another significant feature. Um, except for Kirk Douglas, who's in Partial Glory and Spartacus, and I think the reason for this is because he's very notoriously hard to work with. He's often said to lack compassion, and I believe after you work with Stanley Kubrick once, you don't want to work with him again. In Clockwork Orange, he didn't care that the main actor, Malcolm McDowell, almost went blind in the aversion therapy scene. He still wanted him to do another retake after he was literally screaming in agony. Another significant feature is the settings of his films. He often sets his films in dangerous, mysterious settings. For example, Parcel Glory, set in a war setting. The Sea of the Underworld was the setting for Eyes Wide Shut. Space, a very dangerous setting for 2001: Space Odyssey. Another significant feature is the fact that he often uses a lot of violence in his films, and sometimes this violence is very essential to the narrative. And he does, like in 2001, Clockwork Orange, that was in part a satire on violence itself.